It's rockmusic.blog, the podcast, with me, Robin.
And me, Stewart.
Welcome along, and we're going to find out a bit about each other, maybe some things that we didn't know. I suppose a bit of background. We started working together about 13 years ago at a radio station. Stewart was my boss.
And now he's your lackey in the corner. It's strange how the world changes. Yeah, a long time of music, I think, for both of us. And it's that passion, isn't it? And it's that I can't imagine not having music in my life. And when I'm a teenager growing up in Devon, where nothing happens particularly, music kind of is the only thing you can cling to. And you couldn't even pick up radio stations down there particularly, apart from Radio 1, which in the days of Mike Smith, DLT was terrible. So you really didn't want to listen to it. Obviously, the only person you would listen to was John Peel. When he filled in on daytimes, it was particularly amusing.
So I'm trying to work out when you would have been at, say, sixth form college or something. Would that be in the late 70s or the early 80s? Early 80s, I guess.
No, sixth form college would be mid-80s. So I guess my first really foray into music, I used to get a bus to Exeter every half-term holiday or holidays to go and stock up on vinyl at the time. So that would have been probably my first album about 1982, 83, which actually was Kim Wilde.
How rock and roll is that?
Kids in America. Can't argue with that. True. Poster was quite good as well.
So were you getting stuff from your parents' music collection? Were they into music?
My dad is a major influence on me, and we may not agree on the same music as is the world, but he always had a stack of records. And here's a story. His friend was amazing. Apparently when I was 3 or 4, his mate, who was also into music, said he'd never seen it like it, a child putting records on and off a turntable so carefully without putting their fingers all over the grooves and that kind of stuff. Apparently, I was that kid that treated albums with respect, even at the age of 4.
And what would the albums have been? Do you remember?
Difficult to go. Right, the one that stands out, and my dad had it on a reel-to-reel tape recorder as well, was Simon and Garfunkel, Bridge Over Troubled Water. I can remember listening to that a lot as a kid, so that's probably the first real album. When someone says what's the first album you ever got, everyone's going to say something like, oh yeah, the Velvet Underground. Yeah. First album, obviously Nico. That was my first album, when in reality it was the Best of Disney or something like that. So my first single was We Are the Famous Five, The Famous Five. The second one was Roxy Music, Virginia Plain. Your favourite, I know.
Yeah, I mean, you're still a massive Roxy Music fan and I'm still not.
This is a topic we'll tackle later on. Roxy Music is one of the greatest bands of all time. Let's throw that out there for some controversy before we even start.
I think what's good, by the way, about this is that we overlap on a lot of stuff and we massively diverge on a lot of stuff.
But if everybody liked the same thing, it'd be a very boring world, let's be honest, because it's fun talking about why records are good and someone going, no, it's absolute garbage. It's like, that is the fun of it all. That's part of the enjoyment of a record. And how can you not like The Fall? It's that kind of thing.
So go back to the sixth form common room, because at the age of like 16, 17, 18, I know that you were listening to some pretty okay stuff. And there was a little bit of a sort of a theme going on in that sixth form common room, i.e. you were kind of listening to, I'm going to say, maybe a bit more indie stuff. There was like some metal guys. There were some girls who didn't really get any of it.
I will actually tell you defining moments. There's 2 defining moments in my musical journey into buying lots of records. One was The Enemy in 1985 published a list of the greatest albums ever made, the top 100. Myself and a friend at school literally used this as the Bible and sat every time I went shopping for records, pretty much used it as, we haven't got this one yet, let's go and buy it. So Van Morrison After Weeks, things like that were in there, Joy Division, Unknown Pleasures. Bob Dylan, stacks of stuff that I probably would never have checked out, like Parliament and things like that, were in there. I'd never heard of as a teenager growing up in Devon. So that's one thing that was a landmark. Television Marquee Moon's another album I bought on the back of that. The other one was, we created, it was like I guess it was the first form of file sharing as you'd have now, but this is obviously back in the 80s, it was more like hard work. So this is what we did. We wanted to get more music. These days you can just go on Spotify and listen to it, or download it from somewhere, wherever that source might be, and pretty much anything you want to listen to, you can get your hands on instantaneously, virtually, if you have access to the internet. That didn't exist, kids, in the mid-80s. So what do we do? Right, we had these things called cassettes, which some of you know what they are, but if you don't, it's basically magnetic tape, and in little case, it's rubbish. The sound quality is terrible. They were convenient. You could play them in your car. You could record on them. This is obvious to people that remember that stuff, but if you don't, it's a very different land we lived in. However, how do we get more music? So we had a stack of albums and we virtually created our own catalogue. So we hand wrote out a catalogue, bust it around the school and said to people, okay, here's a list of albums that we've got. If you would like to have one of these records, give us a cassette and we will record it. But we want something from you to do that. So tell me what albums you've got. And if there's one I want, lend me your album, give me a cassette, I'll record the album that you want, meanwhile I'll record your album at home onto my cassette, and then we'll share. We've got more records to share now. There was one guy that I got 2 albums off that changed my life. So the 2 records that he lent me, and I'd never heard them before, I knew the bands but hadn't heard them before, were Pink Floyd The Wall and Led Zeppelin 4.
Okay.
These records literally changed my life and opened my eyes to it. And at the time, me and my mate, we went shopping, we had a competition. So the rule was whoever started buying that artist first got dibs on it. So I remember the day. So I borrowed these 2 albums and I started buying Led Zeppelin and Pink Floyd. And the day I bought my first Led Zeppelin album, which was Led Zeppelin 3 actually,
Yep.
he bought Bryan Adams' Reckless, which meant he had dibs on Bryan Adams' entire back catalogue, where I had dibs on Led Zeppelin's entire back catalogue.
It's hard to call a winner in that particular situation.
I know, who was the richer man at the end of that?
That would be you.
But that was it was this great way of getting music, but we had to put passion and effort into it because you just couldn't. I think actually the days of downloading today makes it too easy for people. We were talking to someone who's into Tom Waits, or we wasn't into Tom Waits. He'd never heard of Tom Waits. Played him one Tom Waits track. He said, "Oh, that's interesting." The next day, he downloaded every single Tom Waits album and said, "Yeah, I've listened to them all." No, seriously, you're not going to listen to those albums properly. It'll washed over you. In fact, I don't know, God knows how many Tom Waits albums there are. It's not the same as having to go to a record shop and maybe buy the one album that's in there.
I wonder whether you're similar to me. When I do that, I'm going to get into a band and I'm going to go and find out something by them. So just as you were describing there with Led Zeppelin, mind you said the first one you bought was Led Zeppelin 3. I would have had to have gone and bought Led Zeppelin 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, and I have to do it in order. And so I'll buy the very earliest one. I did it with Def Leppard when I was a kid. That was one of the first bands I got into, and I went and bought the first Def Leppard album because I'm like, well, if I like this, I'll probably like the ones after it. But I couldn't do it out of order.
That is a level of OCD that I can't relate to. So, interestingly, and I know it's your favourite band of all time, Roxy Music, it didn't happen. So my dad, this is my dad introducing. My dad had Flesh and Blood, which actually I think is the worst Roxy Music album out of the lot. But he had that. I used to listen to that as a kid. Obviously, I was familiar with Roxy Music because they were in the charts, they're around at the time. I wouldn't have been familiar with their early stuff. However, in that chronological buying, it didn't happen. But it depends what was on the shelves in the record shop when you went in, because they may not have had every single album. They probably wouldn't have done. So the last Roxy Music album I bought was actually their first one, and that's the one that blew my mind the most.
That's the one you played me some of the other day, isn't it?
It is.
I quite liked it, actually.
It's
Don't tell
great.
anyone.
It's a fantastic record.
But so you wouldn't? Would you have a plan when you were singing? Well, I've heard Led Zeppelin 4. Let's go to the one before, or
No,
were you just whatever one was you saw and you got it?
The plan was I'll just get whatever's in the record shop. So it could be In Through the Outdoor. It could be Coda. Big mistake. But, that it's what was there. Remember, it's not the days of download. I can't just go on the internet and download whatever I want. I don't even know how to book to tell me what albums are out. I couldn't Google Led Zeppelin albums. What are they by year of release? Didn't exist. You had to find out by rummaging in a record shop and seeing what they go. I haven't seen this album before. Let's have it.
So you've got dibs on Zepp and you've got dibs on Pink Floyd. That's a pretty good start. Where'd you go from next? Because I know that you at that time you were massively into the Smiths and people like that, weren't you?
Smiths came later. Smiths I didn't like at first. Here's a controversial one for me because so this time I'm buying Led Zeppelin and Pink Floyd. The guy I keep mentioning who was also going to me to buy records every half term, whatever, he was massively into the Smiths and Bob Dylan, intriguing enough. So he got over Bryan Adams by this stage. Very quickly, actually, got over Bryan Adams. But he loved the Smiths, and I wasn't really into it. We used to take the mickey out of him, strangely enough. But then in 1986, let's fast forward a bit more to the influence of radio, which I know is a big passion for both of us as well as music. The influence of radio, and actually why I always wanted to work in radio is I saw the power it had, and the power at the time was John Peel. Everyone's going to mention John Peel's into music of a certain ilk, but John Peel had the Festive 50 did every year, where he's basically playing the top 50 songs that people have voted for. We listened to his show, and in 1986, two artists dominated John Pill's Festive 50 and got about 9 tracks in each on it. One of those bands was The Fall, who I then went on to buy, as you know, loads of, and the album was Ben Sinister, which I still think is their best album, and the other band was The Smiths, and it was The Queen is Dead, and that made me start listening to The Smiths and taking them seriously.
So although, as you know, I'm never really been into the Smiths at all, at the time of How Soon Is Now, which I think is that album, or is it a bit later?
No, How Soon Is Now is on Hatful of Hollow, which is earlier.
Earlier?
Yes.
So I loved that when that was in the charts, and I was 7 or 8 or something like that. I absolutely adored it. But even now, still not that bothered about the Smiths.
And I'm going to skip forward to Radio Times. One of my favourite interviews I've ever done was with Johnny Marr. It was on a radio station in Portsmouth called Victory at the time. I was the drive time presenter, and Johnny Marr was playing in Portsmouth at the Pyramids. And it was a live interview while he was in his tour van going to this gig. And he basically asked me directions live on the radio, how to get to the Pyramids from here, which, you know, who else has given Johnny Marr instructions how to get him live on a radio show? But I was allowed one Smiths question, I was told, by his, you know, PR person, because obviously he didn't really want to talk about the Smiths that much, but the one question I threw his way, so tell me which song you're most proud of writing as part of the Smiths, and it was How Soon Is Now. And when I asked him about why in particular and what was special about it, he said he always wanted a riff that the moment you heard it, you knew what it was, like Satisfaction or something like that. The moment you heard those first couple of notes, you know what the song is, and that kind of tremoloed guitar sound is How Soon Is Now at the beginning, and that's what he liked. And he said how difficult it was to get that tremoloed guitar sound as well, because he had like 4 Fender amps with the tremolos on, ganged together, but they went out of time and had to keep doing it, and ended up, basically there's one period when they all were in time briefly, and they ended up looping that, and that is where that bit comes from.
Pretty amazing. And then just to skip forward to when we were both working together, Morrissey brought out an album called You Are the Quarry.
Yes.
And I absolutely love that. So isn't that a strange
one? Which was
one?
his comeback album at the time as
Irish
well.
Blood, English Heart, and all of that. I absolutely love that album.
Who would have thought? Who would have thought? So that's part of the musical journey. But yeah, I think your formative years are very important, and that does shape. And it's that being open to listening to new music, though. It's that thing. There's certain things we all like, but I think it's that curiosity to find out other stuff. And the thing I like is that we both still got that curiosity, even though I'm a bit older than 17 now, to find out what new music is out there. And actually, people like John Peel, he always had that curiosity as well.
And I suppose for you, the whole time I've known you, basically 13 years, you've been doing new music reviews for the local newspaper. So, I mean, that's a massive help because A, you get sent the stuff, you jammy sod, and B, you've got week by week a deadline. You've got to be listening to, I don't know, well, tell us about it. What's that process like for you?
It's interesting because when I used to be program controller of a radio station, which was fantastic, you got to choose what music within reason went on the playlist. You got sent loads of free stuff. And actually, one of the motivations for me to do radio for free when I first started doing it was to get free stuff, free CDs, free entry to gigs, all that kind of thing. So, you know, who doesn't want that? I'm going to talk about John Peel again. I heard him once talking on the radio and say it was a chore having to go and listen. He said, I've got a stack of albums to listen to. And it's a bit of a ball ache, to be honest, now come to think about it. And I only understood that when I was having to listen to music for a job, which was, oh, what a terrible job, Stuart, listening to music. But there's some days I just want to listen to something I want to listen to, like let's play Jimi Hendrix, Axis Boulder Love or something. But no, I've got to sit down and listen to this stack of new CDs that I've never heard before. Half of them are probably awful, and you've got to do that process. So as a program controller, I used to do that to work out what's going to be the playlist the next week and which album should I feature on the rock show or whatever. Writing for the local paper, I get sent less CDs, so the choice is less there. It's less of a chore result. Sometimes you get a stack and just literally in the car. I listen to a lot in the car, so I'll play CDs in the car. That's where you kind of, is this an interesting record or not I want to write about? It's easier to write about stuff, obviously, you think is really good or stuff you think is awful. The stuff that's difficult to write about is stuff that's it's okay, but who wants to read a review that says it's okay? It's not very invigorating for anybody. which is probably why they're okay. So yeah, that process basically starts. I probably try starting listening to them over a weekend at the latest, ideally the week or two before, because it's difficult to review stuff if you've only listened to it once. There's plenty of albums I hated the first time I listened to them, and they grow on you once you're on play 5 or 6. So if I think it's got potential, I'll try and play it more than once or twice. But then normally on a Monday or Tuesday night, I will sit down and put the CDs on in the listening room and start writing.
And you were in a band, weren't you, as well? Was this at uni?
No, it was at school. Here's another interesting journey, trying to create music again. I almost think if we'd ever made it, we could have been quite interesting, because Kraftwerk and that krautrock thing, we weren't that. But the reason it was so different, krautrock in general, is because these Germans grew up in post-war Germany in areas where there wasn't that communication or a scene to be linked into. So they created their own music. They didn't have anything influencing them, really. So it was left to create their own thing. And it sounded unlike anything else because there wasn't anything to draw on. Growing up in Devon, in the middle of nowhere, there was no music scene. I've already said you couldn't really even pick up radio, particularly. So, but we wanted to make music, and we started off making music by actually, my dad had a reel-to-reel tape recorder, and I had a ZX Spectrum, I remember Sinclair. I ended up effectively, looking back, I used that as a sequencer of kind and programmed it to make a sequence of notes, and we use it as like a very simple sequencer. And I used a BBC Model B computer to program something that sounded like electronic drums. Bad electronic drums it was. And we used that to create our first music. My mate then bought a guitar, and then, as everyone does, you start buying instruments and you take the journey from there.
And your mate, is this the same mate that you used
Same
to buy?
guy.
So this one, he got lucky on this one because he got the guitar and you ended up with the bass.
I ended up with I was on nothing. When we first started, there was another guy I was at school with who was basically could play bass, violin, guitar, drums to a certain extent. He's actually in Band of Holy Joy now as their keyboard player, which is one thing he couldn't play when he was in the band. That's just a bit strange. But when we first started, my mate had a guitar. We had a guy come on who played the bass, basically. I ended up having to sing because I couldn't play an instrument. But I turned into the Brian Eno character who basically did the recording and fiddled on the tapes, but didn't have any ability to play an instrument. It was only when they said we're going to play live, it's like, well, what am I going to do? So I thought, I need to learn something. Oh, and who probably hasn't had this in a band? You can play the bass then. So that's how it started.
Quite right too. Fast forward to today. Who are you loving at the moment? Who are the bands that you... I mean, you've mentioned Roxy Music a million times. You've mentioned The Fall a million times. Those are two bands that you still love to pieces. So Zeppelin still there, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, this is the interesting thing. When you've been buying music for 30-odd years or more, there's a lot of records in the room here. Lots of CDs, not all paid for. Didn't steal them, by the way. And you go through phases. You know, I'm not afraid to, if I go in a Zeppelin phase, play every Led Zeppelin album that I've got that I like to death 3 or 4 times in a row, and that's it, and then go through that phase. But there's just so much out there. Intriguingly, what's my latest thing I started buying loads? I went for a Bob Marley phase recently. Probably quite late to start on that, but I did with Catch Fire and things like that. And at the moment, I'm really interested in exploring kind of deep fuzz psychedelic soul.
Deep fuzz psychedelic soul.
And yeah, and funk. So I went to, in fact, a couple of weeks ago, I went to a record shop in York, and I didn't know what any of the records were in it, if I'm honest. But the guy just wrote things like that. Crazy psych funk. If you like funkadelic, you will like this. So I just picked up an album on the strength. It said something like that on the front cover.
Okay, so maybe we'll come on to that in a special funk psych soul
I think
episode.
there will be a... Yeah, where's the funk psych soul blog?
We've set ourselves the challenge of coming up with our top 5 albums of all time, and I haven't seen Stuart's and Stuart hasn't seen mine. I wonder how much overlap there's going to be. We're going to be doing this in a future episode for the albums of 2016. I reckon for 2016, some overlap. We'll come on to that at the due time. For this, the top 5 albums ever, at the moment, it'll probably change in a week's time, but I mean, we're trying to be honest and true to what is our sort of, all-time top 5. But I don't know whether there'll be any overlap at all.
your top 5 is going to be fluid because it's going to change depending on your mood. But that when I've put this together, it's albums I know I've always gone back to at some point, and they've probably been in my top 5 for the last 20 years. That's probably giving away something already. I think there may be. I don't think we'll have the same album, but I think we'll have the same band for one album. Would be the same band, but it won't be the same album.
Okay, I might. Yeah, okay, maybe 2. Maybe 2.
All right, we'll see. So that's my musical journey in a very short nutshell. But obviously, there's going to be 2 of us giving our opinions on stuff on this podcast. So we need to get your background and what got you into music, because I know you're more of an instrumentalist than I am blatantly. But where did your journey start?
I think similar to you, at home listening to the parents' record collection. So my mum had one of these red sort of vinyl covered boxes, and the top of this box was 2 speakers which folded up and came away, and then the rest of the box was a record player. So I think very similar to you, listening to their records on this funny, oh, can I get that box out, mum, sort of thing. And it was very much the Beatles, and that 60s stuff. So my parents were massively into the first 4 Beatles albums, and then there's a gap. Rubber Soul, Revolver, never heard those till I was 20 odd.
Right.
And then Sgt. Pepper, because my dad got given that, but he didn't like it. So the very early Beatles stuff, and maybe some Shadows and Jerry and the Pacemakers and a bit of Del Shannon and all of that kind of stuff. That was where I started. And I suppose the Beatles are still hugely important for me, particularly George Harrison, as it happens. Not John Lennon at all. Sacrilege, I know.
How can you not like John Lennon?
He's too angry. He was a shit as well, wasn't he? To be honest.
Well, he may not be the nicest bloke on the quiet. Who has the best solo albums though?
George, definitely.
No,
don't you think? All Things Must
Pass.
Pass.
He only has one album. That's a triple album. Most of that you probably don't want to listen to.
That's genius.
And part of it's ripped off.
Cloud 9, amazing album. Got into that when I was a kid. Because then, similar to you, when I was going out and buying stuff, I was like, well, what do I want to buy? Oh, yeah, I love the Beatles. So this George Harrison album, Cloud 9, from whenever that's from, sort of latter part of the 1980s, I'll get that. Who's on there? Clapton, Ringo, Elton John, Jeff Lynne. What an amazing place to go. And then the one that was finished off by Jeff Lynne and Danny Harrison, Brainwashed, that's an amazing album.
Right, but it's not John Lennon and the Plastic Ono Band, is it?
Thank God it's not. Because then I don't have to hear all that crap that she does.
No, you've got to have a bit of... I mean, Imagine, I think, is a bit of an overrated album, to be honest, but... Plastic Ono Bound is definitely... My missus can't stand Imagine for some reason. I don't know why. Why do you hate that song?
Oh, it's sort of nihilistic rubbish, really. The philosophy behind it, which people are like, oh yeah, man, I really buy into that whole philosophy. It's nihilistic nonsense. Just imagine there's nothing, and then there's nothing. That's what that song is.
Are you turned on by lyrics?
Yeah.
Interesting, because I'm not so much, I'd rather there was good lyrics rather than I went down the pub and my mate gave me some Chris, who cares? But it's not the thing I look at the most.
It's never the lyrics which give me goosebumps, though. It's the music which gives me goosebumps. So that's, I don't know, I guess I'm 50-50. So, kind of had that Beatles introduction. Then my best mate's dad told me when I was quite young that you weren't allowed to like the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. You had to pick one or the other. At the time, he said everybody picked one or the other, and he was from London, so he liked the Rolling Stones. And he told me when I was about 10 years old, basically, you can't like them both. So to this day, I love the Beatles.
I don't like
really
the
care for the
Rolling
Rolling Stones. I'm not allowed to. I was told 30 years ago, pretty much, one or the other. You got to pick. Well, I picked the Beatles. I already love the Beatles.
Don't be dictated to.
So then my next door neighbour's mum had Queen Greatest Hits. And that's, I suppose, really, that's the beginning. So the Beatles from my folks and Queen's Greatest Hits.
I'm going to have to
What more do you need?
Interestingly, when I was to rewind to when my mate got dibs on something, we both bought a Queen album. So we agreed we both had dibs on it, and both of us fizzled out after about 2 or 3 hours. We didn't buy any more Queen.
So when I got to 16 and started buying CDs, I never had a CD player till I was 16. First started buying CDs. I promise you, the first CD I ever bought was the Flash Gordon soundtrack.
Yes.
Genuinely true story. And then I joined the Britannia Music Club.
That wasn't the Queen,
though, was it? Yeah, no, it was absolutely. I got it because the film's great, but I got that
Gordon's alive.
Hawkmen dive and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, so I think getting into the Britannia Music Club thing where you were sent a CD every month, which would normally be something you didn't want, so you had to pick something you did want. I remember, you got 5 CDs for the price of 2 when you signed up or something like that, and I bought all kinds of things like physical graffiti and compilations of this, and genuinely, I was into guitars. Okay, so at the age of 16, I got a guitar for my birthday, and I was reading Guitarist magazine all the time, and so I would watch things or listen to things because I thought, they will be good guitarists. They will know about guitars. So I watched a Rolling Stones concert to see what guitars they were using. And I was like, oh, yeah, okay, those guitars are pretty cool. And then I watched, I don't know exactly when this would have been, but I watched Pulse. The BBC showed like an hour or maybe an hour and a half of the Pulse concert by Pink Floyd, which I watched because it's Pink Floyd, who I knew very little about. They will have good guitars. And yeah, they did. They really did. And then I kind of went from there and was just hooked and just... It's all about guitars and guitarists. The first concert I went to was Brian May, tying in with the Queen thing again. The second concert I went to was Page and Plant on their world tour, the last night of their world tour. And then concerts have been a huge thing for me. When I was at uni, like 18, 19, 20 years old, most of my friends weren't into rock so much. So Sheffield City Hall had some great artists coming through. So I'd be like, this Joe Satriani fella, he's probably quite good. I'll go and see him. Deep Purple, what are they like? Oh, yeah, they're quite good. So that would be it. I would just be discovering stuff and then buying from Record Collector, an amazing store in Sheffield. I'd just be buying stuff based on what it said in Guitarist, who had cool guitars, and who was coming to play at Sheffield City Hall. So I would be aware of what they were. I'd go and buy Deep Purple in rock to check it out because they're going to play some of that because it's the 25th anniversary or whatever it happened to be.
And is there a defining moment or a gig or something a bit like doing my Share the Records thing where you got an album or 2 albums that changed your musical journey?
Somebody taped Led Zeppelin 1, 2, 3 and 4 for me onto C90 cassettes. I mean, that's pretty big.
Yeah.
To have all of those, delivered to you. There we go. And you can sit and you can listen to them from the first one to the second one to the third one to the fourth one. As your introduction to a band, you're doing it properly because you're listening to them in order.
So, Philip, what years would you buying records as to start with?
So the George Harrison thing would be sort of late 80s, wouldn't it? 87, I reckon that album came out. So I was buying stuff then, but more with like, there's birthday money, go and buy it. Then really from my own money, I guess, was the Britannia Music Club thing when I was 16. And then, hugely when I was at university. People at university spend all their money on all sorts of things. We didn't go out very much. I spent all my money on CDs.
Right. So this is the thing. It's before the days of downloading again. So
this is 95-ish.
Yeah, so you're buying stuff online, via mail order or in a record shop, God forbid. So here's the dilemma for you. You're stocking up on Led Zeppelin. You've got to Houses of the Holy, so Physical Graffiti is the next one chronologically, but they don't have that in the record shop, but they do have In Through the Outdoor or Presents. Do you buy them?
I think with Led Zeppelin, I probably skipped ahead to Physical Graffiti through the Britannia Music Club thing, and I've only got Presents and In Through the Outdoor and Coda from the reissues recently, actually, which I know that we've got all of them between us, haven't we?
Or
on
is
vinyl.
this you didn't buy them because you couldn't get Physical Graffiti at the time? So I can't possibly buy Presents before I got Physical Graffiti.
I probably stopped at Physical Graffiti in a way because it was perfect. Well, like, how can you improve on perfection?
Presents. I quite like Presents, to be honest.
So for me, it's very much about gigs. It's very much about guitars. It's very much about not so much new music now. There is new music, but it's normally new music from people that I already know. Or it's a case of, for example, this year going out, Mike the Fish, who we both know, is massively, massively into vinyl and knows the minutiae of, well, it says this on the label and this is the first pressing and all of, the signature of the guy who cut it, all of that stuff. He's super into that. So we go out record shopping a lot, sometimes to the new shops and sometimes to the second-hand shops. But I'll be like, oh, Wishbone Ash, Argus, that's an album that I've never heard. That's probably amazing. And so I'm buying stuff like that. I'm catching up on the lost classics, as it were.
I wish I'd used that kind of phrase with my mates. You're Mike the Fish or whatever. I could have Phil the Farmer, which would have summed it up perfectly.
So yeah, that's pretty much it for me, really. And still doing radio and still hearing a lot of new stuff and still hearing a lot of the same old stuff because that's radio. That's nothing wrong with that. But just still absolutely driven by music all day, every day, really.
I probably know the answer, but what's your favourite radio station to have worked at? Because I'm guessing it would be one where, not because it had the biggest audience maybe, but because it had what you would view as the better music.
Okay, so when we worked at a radio station together called The Saint, we were kind of, the way that I try and explain that to people who didn't really hear it was kind of classic rock, indie rock, and a bit of Motown.
Mm-hmm.
It's
And
pretty
pop.
fair.
We would play Madonna.
Yeah.
The criteria for a record to get on that radio station between myself and the guy that was managing director at the time, called Tim, was not that we play this sort of music, which many stations have that criteria now. It was, do we think it's a good record? And that was the criteria to play it.
I mean, Liberty X, we used to play some Liberty X and stuff
them.
like that. Early Girls Aloud, Sounds of the Underground, I think we played that. And you'd play that, and then you'd play Stairway to Heaven.
Yeah.
You know, and it was just, this is great music.
London Calling. And then the Kaiser Chiefs.
And then some Marvin Gaye.
Yeah. It was that kind of station.
Yeah.
I know people in the radio industry again, and that's why it's not here anymore. But there we are.
It was good when it lasted.
So we are going to do our top 5 albums of all time, which kind of gives you a background of where we are when we're talking about stuff potentially.
Yeah.
Now, you've got a question about this before we even do it.
So the question is, how much overlap is there going to be?
Right. So I genuinely don't think there's going to be a lot. I think there will be not the same album, but we'll have one artist that will be the same in our top 5s, but we won't have chosen the same record by them.
I'm going to say 2. Maybe.
Place your bets now, ladies and gentlemen.
So, Robin and Stewart's top 5 albums of all time this week, because it could change, and it will change. It's going to be fluid. But hand on heart, this is where we're at for the moment. Number 5, Stuart, tell us what it is.
Number 5, okay, there's always probably going to be Led Zeppelin in my life somewhere. My favourite Led Zeppelin album is the one I probably bought first, strangely enough. It wasn't the one I heard first, it was the one I bought first. I actually sold that record that I bought so I could get the Super Deluxe version. I wish I'd kept it now because it's kind of my musical history, so I would have had the Super Deluxe and the original version that I bought in the 80s of Led Zeppelin 3, which I really like the fact it's got quite a lot of folk influence in it. As well as the heavy stuff, obviously.
Hats off to Roy Harper. What an amazing song that is.
I think this is a great album. And here's the thing. When I was sitting in my sixth form common room and I was listening to Led Zeppelin and someone turned around and said to me, how can you like this and not AC/DC? And I said, because AC/DC aren't going to do a song like Going to California, which I know isn't on Led 3, but it's that thing. Led Zeppelin would do other stuff that isn't straight metal.
And people who are not into it don't get it, but they, people who don't know much about music would say, oh, Led Zeppelin, they're a heavy metal band. Are they? I mean, this is a folk rock album, isn't it, Led Zeppelin 3?
Well...
kind of.
It is. It starts off quite heavy, to be fair. But
yeah, true.
The Immigrant Song, what a great 2.5 minutes that is.
But the theme of that is Icelandic folklore.
Yeah, but it's
or
still...
Norse folklore.
Yeah, but it's not twanging a mandolin while they deliver it. That may have been once. But that's my number 5.
It's a great album. Since I've Been Loving You, I think is one of my favourite songs of theirs ever. I think that's amazing. Tangerine, I've got a lot of love for Tangerine. Living Reflection of a Dream.
Fantastic.
Love that. That's the Way. That's on there, isn't it?
Yeah.
So
Celebration Day.
Got a lot of love for that. Number 5 for me is Hypnotic Eye by Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers.
Really?
Which I'm absolutely loving. It's relatively new, a couple of years old. The reason it's on there is because I was being very truthful with myself and I was thinking, I'm not just going to go for like, oh yeah, I'll include all the ones that people, Sgt. Pepper. When Sgt. Pepper, by the way, is an all-time great. Of course it is. But Hypnotic Eye, I listen to almost every day. Certainly 3 times a week, every week, and have done since I got it. I think it's fantastic.
It is a good record. Interesting with Tom Petty, I prefer his more recent stuff than, his earlier things that he made his name with. And I've gone back and bought lots of his back catalogue now, and I still actually, Hypnotic Eye and Mojo, I still don't think he's done anything as good as those 2 albums, which is probably controversial for some people.
And I bought Damn the Torpedoes a couple of weeks ago just for the first time having that, and it's good and it's great and it's all the things that you like. Not listening to it over Hypnotic Eye. Yeah, I just think that, honestly, if you haven't heard that, I think it's a fantastic album. The songwriting is particularly strong. Musically, it's quite straightforward and quite simple, and I think there's a lot to be said for that.
And actually, one thing got me in Heartbreakers was I've got a Johnny Cash, when he's doing the American series, I've got a box set that's kind of the outtakes that's 5 CDs worth of outtakes. And And on one of those CDs, it's pretty much all backed by the Heartbreakers, the Johnny Cash stuff, and that's a fantastic CD, which kind of took me on that journey as well.
And it ties in with George, my beloved Beatle, because of the Wilburys. So you see, it all goes through. So number 4, Stuart, for you?
Number 4, it gets tough against this. So we've talked about them already. I mentioned already. It is the Smiths. It's Hatful of Hollow, which some people go, oh, that's not a proper album. It's a compilation of kind of B-sides and Radio 1 sessions. But it's just my favourite Smiths album, one of my favourite albums of all time, blatantly. It's just I used to listen to this all the time when I was at university. There's a girl next door to me used to listen to Alana Miles' Black Velvet. She only had one song that she played on and on over the time.
You once heard her take a piss. Not the girl, Alana Miles.
Oh, right. Yes.
Do you remember that?
Yes, I do. I was interviewing her and she went for a piss halfway through the interview. It was just... I love the fact she can't do an interview while she's having a piss. That's pretty rock and roll. However, I played the Smiths to annoy people a lot. And actually, my favourite things when I was doing university radio is this guy called Moondog. I used to do Realm of Dusk, which was my indie rock show. And there's this chap called Moondog came on to do a rock show after me. And at the time, Guns N' Roses were the saviour of rock because I thought it was finished beyond that.
I've just remembered Guns N' Roses. They're not in my top 5. Oh, my God.
Yeah, that is a band that wasn't going to cross over between us, I'm pretty certain.
Man.
Oh, dear. Tom Petty looks shaky all of a sudden. Anyway, he said to me, basically my last song before he came on was a Smiths track, and he said to me, don't ever play the Smiths again before my show and make everyone turn off. So obviously from that moment forward, my last track every single week was the Smiths. And actually the last song that was played on University Radio York of the decade of the 80s was the Smiths, How Soon Is Now. And the reason I chose to play it is because, and I said, I believe that Morrissey and Marr were the Lennon and McCartney of the 80s.
So why this album in particular then? Why not, The Queen is Dead or any of the other great albums?
There's just something about this that every track for me is a winner. And there's a few different versions. So things like Hand in Glove still are different versions to what they were on the debut album. The debut album was badly recorded, actually, and Morrissey says that in his biography. It was just badly produced. This record just sounds great. There's a certain freshness and energy to everything because there are a lot of Radio 1 sessions as well. It's just packed with amazing songs. Everyone's a winner. I just think it's a fantastic record. If you want one Smiths album, it is this, even though it's not a proper album in terms of it's conceived as this is what the album would be.
Okay.
So snap that up, guys.
I've got a bit of a sneak preview of what your number 3 is because I can see it on the floor down there. I shouldn't have looked, should I?
No, you shouldn't. I should hide them around the back. But anyway.
My number 4 is definitely not going to be one that's going to cross over between us. It is based on the fact that in 1995, possibly 6, Deep Purple, as previously mentioned, were playing at Sheffield City Hall. I went on my own. I knew that they would be good. They were doing like a 25th anniversary of Deep Purple in rock, and they had a new album out with the new guitarist because Richie Blackmore had buggered off once again for the 20,000th time he'd left. So they finished off a Japanese tour with Joe Satriani. They'd done a little bit of a European tour with Joe Satriani, and then they were like, right, we need some... Joe's not the answer. He knows he's not the answer. We know he's not the answer. It was never intended to be the answer. Steve Morse became the answer. So you have the Mark II lineup of Purple. So you've got John Lord on keyboards, you've got Roger Glover on bass, you've got Ian Pace on drums, Ian Gillan on vocals, and this guy Steve Morse, who is an American guitarist from the Dixie Dregs and a whole load of other stuff and solo stuff, him on guitar, and he's my favourite guitarist. And I think he became my favourite guitarist when I was about 18 or 19 when I got that, the album that we're talking about now, Perpendicular. When I got that new Deep Purple album and saw them on their tour, it blew me away. Track 4 on Perpendicular is a track called Sometimes I Feel Like Screaming, which for me basically has the perfect guitar solo on it, and it's about 4 minutes long. Get in.
And was you drawn to this because of their guitars or because of the guitar playing?
On this one, the playing. I actually, for a very long time, have thought about buying a Music Man Steve Morse Y2D or whatever it's called. I think the probably the neck's actually a little bit narrow for my liking. I did play one this year, second hand. It was about $1,000. I was like, tempted. Didn't buy it. His guitar is very cool. He originally had a guitar which was like a cross between a Telecaster and a Strat. So I think it was a Telecaster body, maybe with an extra pickup and a Stratton neck on it, or the other way around. I forget. I should know. But his guitar now, his own sort of signature guitar, features some pickups which look like they would be in a Telecaster, and they've got sort of 2 humbuckers and some single coils, and this whole thing is very flexible tone. He can play country. He can play like he's amazing. He's so fast, but so tuneful.
For anyone that hasn't met Robin, you probably haven't. It's safe to say you're not a small gentleman. You're a big lad.
It's
aren't
true.
you? I'm actually thinking I'm going to come to one of the bands that's in my top 3 albums if they go in a minute. But that lead guitarist is a big chap. And if he's got a Fender Strat in his hand, it looks like a matchstick.
Right.
Do you need the right guitar to fit with your physique as well, though, if you're a guitarist?
I don't know. I mean, obviously hand size comes into it a little bit, because how far you can stretch and whatever. But my main guitar I got when I was 18 is a Gibson SG, which I got secondhand for my 18th birthday from my mum and dad. Well, I had a choice of a brand new Flying V or a secondhand SG, and I'm actually getting a Flying V next year. It's taken a while to get there, but yeah. So this SG I've had, obviously exactly the same as what Angus Young plays. Angus Young does not have big hands, and he does all right. You know, he's a passable guitarist. He's known to bring out a riff or two.
Yeah, SG is going to be better than the Flying V, surely. Flying V just says Spinal Tap to me.
Yeah, but that's not necessarily a bad thing, is it?
I think it is. It depends if you're trying to be a comedy band or not, but there we are.
I've got a lot of love for the V. It's a bit more metal than rock, isn't it? I think in the world of metal, it's pretty there. So, Stuart, what's your third choice, your number 3 album?
So, third album of all time, we're going back to that period I mentioned when I borrowed a couple of albums off someone at school. One was Led Zeppelin 4, the other was Pink Floyd, The Wall, and The Wall has stayed with me, and Led Zeppelin 4 has as well. We've already got Zeppelin. This is an album that really did blow me away at the time. I still love Comfortably Numb. I think it's faded out too quickly. I'd like an extended guitar solo of the ilk that's on the Pulse concert where Dave Gilmour gets to really go for it. But the interesting about this album, barring things like Comfortably Numb and obviously Brick in the Wall Part 2, the individual tracks on their own don't make any sense and probably don't stand up at all individually. I know the B-side to Brick in the Wall Part 2 was one of my turns. I mean, just listen to it on its own, you think, what the hell's this? It doesn't really stand up. But as an album, and it's a concept album, I know people were much maligned. I don't mind a concept album myself. It just flows as an amazing piece of work. And when you get to even the trial makes perfect sense within the realms of the album. But every track just blows me away when I listen to the record. And I like the fact it ends as it starts. And in fact, I'm pretty certain if you can join the bits up of what they're saying, when they're doing the outside the wall, it's just one brilliant concept album flows through. And I know it's Roger Waters' trip, really, but the remaining members before, I know Rick Wright was probably on the way out at this point, but everyone still contributes to this album. It hasn't turned into the Roger Waters solo show completely yet. Brilliant.
It's quite dark, isn't it?
I like dark records. There is obviously all the storyline about it where you're thinking, like, how much this is influenced by Nazism, some of the imagery from that obviously is running through it. But it's just a fantastic piece of work. I just love the fact the way it just flows. Pink Floyd as well, and this is the hi-fi thing, and I got fed up using Dark Side of the Moon to buy hi-fi with. All Pink Floyd albums, I know they spent ages in terms of when they're recording them, not overdubbing loads of track backwards and forwards, using the same piece of tape, so you keep that sound quality all the way through, and that's kind of on this album as well. And it's the nuances of like hearing, someone getting their hand cracked with a cane that you can hear in the background on the left-hand channel and things like this add to it as well. There's a lot of time and investment and thought gone into that record. I'm not certain people do that these days since the digital revolution came in.
I wonder as well with the whether the writing is sort of influenced by the fact that it's very much the post-war generation. You think about Pete Townsend and you think about Tommy, they're not dissimilar albums.
Yeah, and there is that post-war thing about it, obviously. I think when it comes to the final cut, I think David Gilmour said, like, by this stage, that, oh, for Christ's sake, Roger, shut up about your dad. And we've reached that stage. But this album, it's the perfect balance. It's not too self-indulgent on that level. It's brilliantly played. There's some fantastic songs. It's classic Pink Floyd all the way through there. It's just brilliant. And I actually think it is better than Dark Side of the Moon.
I remember seeing the film for this, the sort of the animated thing, and that is suitably dark, and I think kind of put me off the album.
It ruined it a little bit for me. I wish I hadn't watched the film, and I wouldn't watch it again. It's been long enough now I've forgotten the film, and I just listened to the album. But and there's tracks on the film that aren't on the album, and I actually think it's the right thing. It could have been a triple. They brought it down to a double, and it's a double of gold. Triple probably would have been, what's that? Just listen to the final cut if you wonder what rubbish would have been on the wall if they'd left it as a triple.
Number 3 for me, Pink Floyd, Dark Side of the Moon. I mean, what can I say about that? Again, I kind of got into that around the time of seeing Pulse on TV and getting into bands because I was like, oh, they should be really good guitarists. And seeing David Gilmour and going, oh my God, he is a really good guitarist. I've seen him twice in the last year and a half, both times at the Royal Albert Hall in London, so in 2015 and in 2016, and he's just amazing. Amazing, amazing. Like, probably the best 2 gigs I've ever been to, and the top 5 before that was pretty sound, you know? It was all right. There wasn't too many shonky gigs in there, and he's just gone last year, straight in at number 1, and this year, I know you didn't go this year, but you went the year before, this year I thought he experimented more. I think last year was kind of like, well, I'm going to play these songs, and we're going to see how it goes, and he had Phil Manzanera, funnily enough, with him, didn't he? This year he didn't. He had a different guitarist with him, I can't remember who it was, but I think he took more risks, and I think he let things happen more organically, whereas perhaps last year, maybe it was a bit more, this is the show, these are the songs. I don't know, like maybe there's just 10% or 5% more fluidity when I saw him this year. But for me, I got Dark Side. They did a reissue or a remaster for a CD at some point in the 90s. I bought that. It was probably a 25th anniversary thing or something. The track listings all mess up on the CD, like so track 1 and track 2 are just track 1 or something. It's a bit weird. I don't really know why that's the case. And then I've got that vinyl, which I think I bought around a few months ago, which was, I think, labelled up as being a 40th anniversary reissue of Dark Side of the Moon, but I think the actual mastering was maybe a 30th or a 35th anniversary mastering or something. I think it was something which was available before, and it's amazing. And we both sat here and went, oh my God, this is amazing, didn't we?
Yeah, no, it's the Dark Side of the Moon for a long time I did not really like. It was, I know it's, you know, everyone goes about it's the Pink Floyd album we should have. My dad had it when I was growing up as a kid. My dad had that record, and my mum banned it because she hates the sounds of clocks ticking, so know how time starts. So it wasn't allowed to be played in my house at the time, which added a certain intrigue to the record. This is banned. Why? Not banned, but banned in the house. But I always preferred Meddle to that album for a long time. And it's only recently I've kind of put Dark Side of the Moon back up where everybody else would have had it in the first place. It's a great, intriguing concept behind the whole thing again. I think the way it's put together by asking people what their fears are, when did you last fight someone, like kind of to create the fears that we all share to go behind the concept of the album is really interesting. It does fizzle out a bit for me on side 2.
And this is interesting because I played it to my dad, who's got no concept of Pink Floyd at all, and he thought side 2 was far better than side 1. I don't mind. I find them both equally good. Do you remember we found you have a sort of a
History
series
of
of
Rock review.
Yeah. So tell us about that magazine and tell us what he said.
So History of Rock, currently they're basically compiling articles from the Enemy and the Melody Maker, written. They're going back in the archives, and every edition they're doing a year. So 1973, Dark Side of the Moon is in there, and they actually published the review that would have been written by the guy writing for, I can't remember, it's Melody Maker or Enemy, one of those two, who went to a preview play, a press day where you go and hear the album first, and they did it at the London Planetarium, I seem to remember, which is a great place to hear this album for the first time. And what's really intriguing is he basically says the album is terrible, and they split in half, or they turn the record over in terms of people's experience, but said people are within a couple of minutes of smoking cigarettes, wandering around, not really paying attention during the first side. He says it gets better in side 2, which is the opposite.
Says the side 2 was an absolute revelation, and it was eye-opening and all the rest of it. He absolutely raved about side 2.
Yeah, and I don't get it, because I think side 1 is way better than side 2. It gets progressively fizzles out for me. Well, between on us and them, it's like, really?
Isn't that interesting?
It is. But I do think it does have some really prophetic lyrics in it. Particularly on Time. I remember, and you might relate to this, I remember actually quoting, as you do as a sixth former, the lyrics of Time to my neighbour in a chemistry lesson once. And which I kind of doesn't this say it all? You know, no one told me when to run. You missed the starting gun. And then he goes, yeah, that's why I'm a Christian. Left me kind of speechless. It wasn't the reaction I was expecting. But it does have a brilliant line in that is actually poetic, that could be published as a work of sheer observation of the English way. That hanging on in quiet desperation is the English way. It's true. It is an amazing observation that could be quoted in 100 years' time to sum up what we as a country and a population are like.
So at number 3, you had Pink Floyd The Wall, I had Pink Floyd Dark Side of the Moon. I mean, you know, they've got to be happy with that.
We'd have two bands the same. I didn't think they'd be in the same position.
No.
Different albums, though.
So what's at number 2 for you?
Right, so this is where the divergence away from... Well, so I've done it with the Smiths already, to be fair. So this is back to indie rock, and I grew up with indie when I was a student, and pretty much from then onwards, from the days of listening to John Peel in the late 80s, mid-80s, I've been a big alternative rock fan. And this band are... I was so close to putting to the best album of all time. Really close. I absolutely love the Pixies. I think they genuinely, no other band sounds like them. They were totally unique in what they came out with, and they started doing that. The guttural screaming that Black Francis comes out with. He's singing in Spanish and then he's singing in English. It's a weird mixture of stuff that you've never heard as a teen. You think, what is this? But they rocked in an indie sense, not in a, here's a 10-minute guitar solo. They wouldn't do that. But they pumped it out. They were short, snappy songs. There's 15 tracks on. Doolittle is the album I'm talking about, which is their pinnacle, I think. 15 tracks, 2 to 3 minutes long, and it's just bang, track, idea, and it just... There's not a loser. Even Silver, which is where they all swap instruments, is still a great track as well in the context of the album. I remember actually being on university radio at a sixth form common day when they come and have a look around the university. We had an outside broadcast for the station. I remember putting Doolittle on there, and I played 8 tracks off the album in an hour because people kept requesting more Pixies. And as far as live at the time, I went to see them in the late 80s, and they are still my favourite band I've ever seen live. I haven't been to see them since they reformed, and actually I don't know if I want to, because it could pop that bubble, because I'm not certain they're as good as they were. So I want to keep that memory alive, so I'm not going to see them live, but that album is just astounding, and nothing sounds like it on this planet.
And I've never heard it.
You've never heard Doolittle? This sounds like a challenge we're going to be doing in the future.
Yeah, if we're going to do some kind of make each other listen to stuff that we've never really heard before, then, you know, for me, go for it. You know, that's fine. I'll be quite happy to listen to it, but I know nothing.
Have a number 13, babe.
Nothing about that.
This Monkey's Gone to Heaven.
I do know that because you used to play that on the Stadium Rock show.
I did.
So I do know that. That's okay. So that's the only Pixies that I know.
And the thing about them is that there's the unique thing about them as well is the loud, quiet thing they're renowned for as well. Which when they're cranking, they really crank, and it is that there is always light and shade within a song, but it's more like brilliant sunlight and then really, really quite dark. That's the difference. What a fascinating documentary to watch, actually. I can't remember what it's called. It might be called Loud Quiet, actually. It was recorded in about 2004 when the band reformed. Kim Deal came back in, and it's the original lineup, and they do a world tour and this kind of thing. And it's watching the band disintegrate in front of your eyes during this documentary, where Kim Deal has had loads of drug problems in the past, so her sister goes on tour with her to keep her on the straight and narrow. And by the end of the documentary, she's saying, I'm all right with this Carlsberg. It's only 5%. That's not really alcohol, is it? As she knocks back another crate. So and the drummer, his dad dies while he's on tour, which obviously is not a great thing, but he starts taking tranquilizers to cope with it at the time, and there's one bit in this documentary where they're live on stage and he's so off his head, he just carries on drumming during the end of the song. Doesn't stop when the song stops, he carries on doing the drumming, just carries on, and the band's just sitting looking at him going, what the... And then they just all walk off and leave him to it. Message go, they're going mental, going like, "What's going on? You're off your head."
It's like Moby Dick. It was a 25-minute drum solo. There's no problem with that, surely.
I don't think in the context of the Pixies, it's quite the same. But fascinating documentary, amazing band, amazing record.
At number 2 for me, talking of Moby Dick, Led Zeppelin 2.
See, I could have predicted that. Albeit, and you was right. There was 2 bands the same in our
Yeah,
top.
Zeppelin.
And it hasn't finished yet either.
Hasn't finished yet. So Led Zeppelin 2, I mean, you're going to have to sneak some Deep Purple in at number 1. Surely you're going to go for, like, Fireball, Machine Head, Deep Purple in rock? No?
I was waiting for you to say...
Concerto for Group and Orchestra?
I thought The Queen is Dead was coming in for you there, to be fair.
So Led Zeppelin 2, for me, is, again, just amazing. It's perfect. I don't even like Whole Lot of Love. I'm not even too bothered about the Lemon song, but, you know, What Is and What Should Never Be is amazing.
You mean you don't want to... Women to squeeze your lemon till the juice runs down your legs?
Well, you know, I don't mind a bit of Howling Wolf, but, you know, admit that it was Howling Wolf. Do it properly at the time.
There's while you mention that, there is lots of this on YouTube. If you Google Led Zeppelin rip-off and just see... where do you sit on the Led Zeppelin ripped off all these blues artists?
Everybody ripped off all those blues artists. How do you think the Rolling Stones got started?
The interesting when you watch
That's why the
those,
Beatles are so important, by the way, because the Beatles were the ones who weren't ripping everybody off. They were the ones who went, do you know what, we'll do our own thing.
Well, they still did covers at the start.
At the start.
But it's interesting. Whenever you watch those videos, I do generally think that Led Zeppelin did develop it and take it onto a different level. It's not the same song exactly. They may nick the lyrics or nicked a couple of the riffs, but to be honest, I still think Led Zeppelin have done it better than maybe those originals were.
So I've got on my phone here, just for reference. So A Whole Lot of Love. I mean, obviously that's, you know, perfectly fine. What Is and What Should Never Be, the Lemon song. Right now, Thank You, Heartbreaker, Living Loving Maid, She's Just a Woman, and Ramble On, I think is the finest 4 songs in a row on any album ever. I understand that on the vinyl there's a switch in sides there, but remember I had it on this tape, you know, the tapes that I had with Led Zeppelin 1 and 2 on one tape, 3 and 4 on the other tape, and on CD you don't switch them over. But for me, Thank You, Heartbreaker, Living Loving Maid, She's Just a Woman, Ramble On, that is perfection. Then, I don't even mind Moby Dick, because the riff from that's pretty cool. And Bring It On Home, I never used to listen to, because it starts off with this bluesy kind of like, you know, bluesy harmonica, and this kind of like, bring it on home to me. Like he's sort of talking from the bottom of a well when he's singing. Wasn't too bothered. Then it comes in with this, da-na-na-na-na, da-na-na-na-na, and I'm like, oh my god, that is the perfect Led Zeppelin thing. That's like, it's got the swagger that they've got. It's the blues rock album. So, you know, it's not like your Led Zeppelin 3 folk rock album. This is the real deal.
This is the metal album, though, isn't it, I guess? This is the one where they're supposed to define heavy metal.
I mean, maybe, but, I mean, they're not Black Sabbath, so let's not give them that accolade. I mean, you know, I don't think Zeppelin are ever heavy metal. This is the hardest rocking album, for sure, and it's fantastic.
So, we're on to the number 1.
Number 1. I don't even know if I'm going to try and guess... You haven't mentioned the Fall have not been in this top 5 yet, so there's...
No, they haven't. And I'll probably give this away because Ben Sinister, I thought about it while I was sitting, I said maybe Ben Sinister should have been in there, but it isn't. So it isn't the Fall. So you may want to stab a guess. I think you probably could guess who it might be if it isn't the Fall.
Roxy Music. Oh, Roxy Music, for sure.
Yeah, blatantly Roxy Music, obviously. And it is, now for a long, long time, my favourite Roxy Music album, by default favourite album of all time, was For Your Pleasure, their second album, which is brilliant as well. Things like The Bogus Man is 9.5 minutes of just kind of this kooky, snaking riff that goes on from Phil Manzanera. It's quite sinister, but it doesn't make it quite into being the number 1 for here, because I've replaced it with the last Roxy Music album I ever bought, which is actually the debut album. And the reason the debut album makes it over For Your Pleasure is because it seriously still blows my mind today when I play it. I've said that no one sounds like the Pixies, they don't, but Roxy Music is so unlike anything you've ever heard or hear again, and no other band has got close to sounding like this. They came from an art school background. Looks like glam rock on there, but it's a real mixture of just crazy honking sax. Who else has an oboe to start a track? It's just absolutely mind-blowing. There's film influence. 2HB is obviously a dedication to Humphrey Bogart, which is quite a track. Interestingly enough, if you see Brian Ferry play live today, he still plays a lot of older Roxy Music stuff. And In Every Dream Over Heartache is always played, it appears, when he plays live. So it is just off the wall. Manzanera cranks out some crazy guitar solos, not in the classic rock sense, just searingly bonkers. I mean, the guy's wearing sparkle wraparound shades on the inside cover. That sums it. It is glam, but it's just got more intelligence to it. It's not the sweet, nothing like that. It's just the fact it's got an oboe, the fact it's got sax going on it, the fact it's got Brian Eno sitting with tapes making weird synth sounds in the back. It's very experimental. It's still commercial, just mind-blowingly original. And I genuinely can't think of anybody that's done anything like this or do anything like it ever again. In the context of no one knew who Roxy Music were pretty much when they came out and produced this record. That you can't detect any influences in it particularly at all and go, that sounds like this. They've nicked that. None of that. It is unique. It's just mind-blowingly original and fantastic.
2 questions about the album. The actual album that you've got in front of you is a sort of a gatefold LP. One, does the cover image of a lady wearing some sort of dancing, like flamenco-y type outfit, does that tell you anything about the album at all? It doesn't for me, but maybe I'm missing something.
No, but every single Roxy Music album, apart from Avalon, has a picture of a model on the front of some kind that I suspect Brian Ferry may have been having relations with, but that could be libelous. But Brian Ferry was at an art school. He was always into image as well. He's always groomed and still is. Maybe that put people off him. But there was a lot about it's not just the music. It was the whole concept of the cover and what the band should appear like. Graham Simpson's the bass player on this album. I think he's a really good bass player, actually, particularly on this record. You can't hear him on the others because he's booted out. When you look at the inside cover, he's wearing kind of a tank top while the rest are wearing sequins and are glammed up and wearing makeup. So maybe his days were always going to be numbered in this particular band.
Second question about the gatefold sleeve of that is Brian Eno looks exactly, it's not a question, it's a statement, he looks exactly like Elrond from Lord of the Rings. What the hell? It's uncanny.
He does have, actually, I don't remember Elrond wearing a leopard skin jacket.
Obviously that was out when he was at a jazz club or something, and he didn't want to be spotted as the Lord of Rivendell.
And he didn't have green eye makeup on, but apart from that,
it's uncanny.
There is a bit of a similarity there. And that's the other great thing about these first 2 albums, that Brian Eno is on it. Both himself and Brian Ferry quite big characters. Strange if both called Brian but spelled differently. However, I think Brian Ferry generally couldn't take the competition from Brian Eno in terms of attention when the band are playing. There's only 2 albums with Eno involved. They are the best 2 albums. It says for a long time I tried denying that fact, but it is there. That's the experimental side of stuff, and that's where Eno will spend ages trying to see if this experiment works or not. And basically, Brian Ferry didn't have time to sit doing that all the time. Want to do it, I don't think. But yeah, with Eno involved, fiddling on the tapes, making weird synth sounds, experiment with stuff that no one had really played with before. It just really adds to the whole thing.
And as a confirmed non-Roxy Music lover, you did play me some of that, a track or 2 maybe the other month, and I actually really enjoyed it. I thought it really wasn't what I was expecting. So
if there is something that you might find, plus this strange delivery of vocal that Brian Ferry has throughout it. I mean, Lady Tron just starts off with a weird synth kind of thing, which is Brian here fiddling, and then you get this oboe come in. And it's just mind-blowing. I just sit going, it sends goosebumps down my back when I hear it, and it's an oboe on a rock album, or glam rock album. Fantastic. Yeah, it just, I think, again, you can, if I'm very honest, you could say, for your pleasure, maybe have stronger tracks across the whole album. Again, side 2, there's tracks on side 2, not certain about this, but in the context of the record as a whole, I love it. It's just fantastic, and it is so original. That's why it has to be the number 1.
Good choice.
And yours is
Led Zeppelin, Physical Graffiti.
2 Led Zeppelin albums in.
Yes.
Right. Okay.
So I did mention it earlier that
there are more bands that can be bought in the world.
You say that, but why would you when you can listen to Led Zeppelin? One of the first CDs I got from that Britannia Music Club was Physical Graffiti. I think it was because I was looking for good value. I could choose 5 free albums, and that was a double album. So that's like getting 6 albums for 5, isn't it? It's, added value.
I just because you mentioned Britannia Music Club, I genuinely thought that was the Antichrist, because the person I knew at school who also used that bought things like Phil Collins.
I probably bought some Phil Collins as well.
Yeah, I see.
But, I got some decent stuff too.
Jefferson Airplane?
No, none of that.
Quicksilver Message Service, do they have that in the catalogue even?
They probably would. They would. They would,
You
and
sure?
they would have had Wishbone Ash Argus and things like that, and
Robbie Williams,
Nazareth, and all sorts. They would have everything. They had everything. So for me, it's not even about Kashmir. It's definitely not about In My Time of Dying, although I like that more than I did then. But you've got The Rover and Custard Pie, I think are fantastic. Trampled Underfoot is amazing. Kashmir is obviously solid. It is solid. But it's the second disc, or sides 3 and 4 of the double album. Talking about the Led Zeppelin reissues, which of the super deluxe ones have you got? Just Led Zeppelin 3?
Just 3.
And which one have I got? Just Physical Graffiti. Between us, we've got the vinyl of all of the other ones. So we've got the normal sort of deluxe editions with the bonus stuff. You've got 1, I've got 2, you've got 3, I've got 4, and Houses of the Holy, and
5.
And I've got the rest on. Actually, to be fair, probably the last 3 we've probably got on CD between us. But Physical Graffiti.
The last 3 I don't have the reissues, but I'm on vinyl.
Oh, okay. So we're doing it. We're doing it. Physical Graffiti for me is absolutely unbelievable. The bonus tracks are amazing, and I'm only saying that because that's something which maybe if you're coming to it later and you're getting the super deluxe or the reissues, some of the bonus tracks are really, really amazing. But that sort of side 3 and 4 or the second disc, just unbeatable. I just, Down by the Seaside, all of those. It's an amazing album.
2 Led Zeppelins in the top 5.
2 in the top 2. 3
Right.
and 3 in our top 10, sort of 5 between
Well,
us.
there we go. So, folks, it's Led Zeppelin you need to check out blatantly.
Should we change the name of the podcast to the Led Zeppelin Hour?
Isn't there one something like we don't?
There is
mention
one
other
called
ones,
Ramble On. I would have gone for that.
but they've stolen it already.
Yeah.
Well, there'll be plenty of Roxy music to come up in the future, I'm certain.
So that was our top 5 and a little bit about us. This is Rock Music Blog, the podcast. If you want to find us online, rockmusic.blog is, funnily enough, the website. We're also on Facebook. You should search for that. And if you want to find us on Twitter, I'm usually retweeting David Coverdale is what I find myself doing the most. I'm sure you've got something to say about that.
I think the comment, David Coverdale in leather, still sticks with me that you mentioned one.
He's the
And not
best.
sticks with me in that way, guys.
Pretty much the best front man I've ever seen. I think he's amazing. So if you want to follow us on Twitter, somebody already had at Rock Music Blog, so we're at Rock Music Blog 1, the number 1 on the end, which is annoying, but you'll find us easily enough. We've got a cool little logo and plenty going on there, and we shall bring you a new edition very soon, which will feature our top 5 albums of 2016.